Let us pray. As Canadians and as Albertans, we give thanks for the precious gifts of freedom and peace which we enjoy. As members of this Legislative Assembly, we rededicate ourselves to the valued traditions of parliamentary democracy as a means of serving our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Premier.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to members of this Assembly an outstanding young man who is seated with his parents and his coach in your gallery. The family is from the constituency of Rocky Mountain House, and therefore I'm introducing them on behalf of our member from Rocky Mountain House as well as the government. This young man is well known throughout Alberta, Canada, and the world. I'm referring to the 1989 World Figure Skating Champion, Kurt Browning. He is accompanied by his parents, Neva and Dewey Browning, and his coach, Michael Urinek. Mr. Speaker, at a time when some aspects of athletics are under intense scrutiny, this young Albertan has done a great deal to inspire our young people in amateur sport. His continual drive for excellence, and also having been the first in the world to successfully complete a quadruple spin jump in competition, has proven to all of us what one can do with hard work and determination, and we are very proud of him. I have also, Mr. Speaker, come to know him personally because together at a charity function we were teammates and were able to conspire together and team up and beat the team led by the Premier of Ontario. So we enjoyed that, and I must tell you that Mr. Browning's abilities are not just limited to being on skates, but in baseball shoes he is something to see as well. So I'd ask, Mr. Speaker, that Kurt, his parents, and his coach, who are sitting in your gallery, rise and receive the welcome and congratulations of this Assembly.
Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, it is a special privilege to introduce to you, through you to the members of this Assembly, two very special Albertans who are officials of the IS at the International Steel Trading Corporation, an Edmonton company with offices in the Chinese cities of Harbin and Dalian. They are Mr. Tom Watson, the Vice President, and Joe Watson, the Project Manager in the Harbin office. Also with us is Mr. Brian Trendell, the Chairman of the Board of IS Trading, and although he's not able to be with us today, I would also like to acknowledge Mr. Andrew Lonseth, President of IS Trading. After the tragic events in China of June 4th and 5th, when it became necessary to have Canadians leave China, Mr. Joe Watson of the Harbin office, a young Albertan, working through his father, Tom, and with Mr. Andrew Lonseth of their Edmonton office, working with the officials of my department, organized the group of 26 Albertans in Harbin, 22 University of Alberta students, 2 professors and 2 doctors, liaising closely with the government of Heilongjiang, arranged the charter flight which provided the exit from the troubled country to Hong Kong on June 11th. I just want to say that to carry out these arrangements, the people mentioned worked on a virtual 24-hour-a-day basis from June the 6th, when the decision was made to evacuate the Albertans, until June 11th, when they arrived safely in Hong Kong. I want to pay tribute to this dedication and to the crucial decision-making to the officials of my department, as well as the office in Hong Kong, who coordinated this. I regard this as being done at all times with an exemplary degree of professionalism, patience, and sensitivity. These fine Albertans are a credit to this province, to Canada. I would like to ask the Assembly to join me in expressing our deep gratitude and appreciation to them. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I would ask the Assembly to join me in welcoming to Alberta Mr. Joe Watson's bride, Mrs. Soong Hwa Watson, who happens to be from our sister province in Heilongjiang. Please rise and accept the welcome of our Assembly.
Members of the Assembly, it's my pleasure to welcome at this time a number of my colleagues in the role of Speaker across the country. So I would ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly. First, from the Yukon, Sam Johnson, Speaker of that Assembly. Also from Prince Edward Island, Speaker Eddie Clark. From Newfoundland, the Speaker, Tom Lush, and the Deputy Speaker, Lloyd Snow. So I would ask that, and from New Brunswick, my first Vice President, Frank Branch. Would you please accord them the warm welcome of them?
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests.
Deputy Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure and honor today to introduce to you and through you to all members of the Assembly, the delegates and families to the 29th Canadian Regional Conference of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, which you have hosted so ably during the previous several days, and as a result of which you will be chairman of the Canadian speakers for the ensuing year. I would ask our special guests, who are seated in the members and public galleries, together with the members of the Alberta delegation, to rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Legislative Assembly a group of senior citizens from the city of Wetaskiwin. These individuals are residents of the Good Shepherd Lutheran Home in Wetaskiwin and are accompanied by their Activity Director, Joanne Kneller. They are seated in the Members Gallery, and I would ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Economic Development. Mr. Speaker, the people of Alberta, and especially the official opposition, understand that the government does have an important role to play in diversifying and strengthening our economy. Mr. Speaker, however, if we're going to throw money at corporations, there are two things Alberta taxpayers have the absolute right to demand: performance and security. Now, Mr. Speaker, in the recent $67 million package to Peter Pocklington, we certainly haven't seen performance. We know some of the money's gone, and no construction in southern Alberta or in Edmonton, Mr. Speaker. And we now find from the Minister that some of the money was not being used to create jobs as promised, but, Mr. Speaker, it's actually to cover operating costs. But, Mr. Speaker, the other day the Minister said we did have some security. And that's what we want to pursue today, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Minister: can the Minister give his absolute commitment to the Assembly today that every single dollar of that $67 million is covered and that there'll be absolutely no loss to the taxpayers of Alberta?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, if the
Honourable Leader, the New Democratic Party will check the record over the last number of weeks, both in question period and within the Legislative Assembly when my estimates were before the House. You will find that those answers are answered in a very forthright manner during previous proceedings.
Mr. Speaker, well, this is how forthright you are. We'll ask the Treasurer, and I'll ask the question to the Treasurer. Can the Treasurer give us his absolute guarantee that the $67 million, that there will be no loss, not one penny to Mr. Pocklington, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, we would like to provide that assurance, but of course to predict the future with that kind of precision is not given to certainly politicians. And I can only say, Mr. Speaker, that as the member, my colleague, the Minister of Economic Development, has pointed out, that we have taken all possible precautions to ensure that we have the first claim against a variety of assets which are located here in Alberta and also across the provinces of Canada. And that security, Mr. Speaker, is made up of assets, fixed assets, land, machinery where possible. It's made up of a second claim against inventories and receivables. It's made up of a variety of charges, including such nominal things as trademarks and those kinds of registration, wherein through agreement, Mr. Speaker, we have the first claim against those assets. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, while I like to say that we would like to guarantee the future with respect to possible losses, all I can say is that when a company continues on a going concern basis, the likelihood of repaying its debt is much greater than through liquidation. And I know the member from Norwood understands that. And we think we have a very good position based on appraisals taken at the time of the agreement was given.
Bill. Mr. Speaker, I have in front of me the Gainer's property debenture and a company 369413 Alberta. Mr. Speaker, it certainly doesn't look like $67 million worth because it contains 12 pages of permitted encumbrances, Mr. Speaker, 12 pages worth of deductions. My question then to the Treasurer, flowing from his answer, surely then there must be some other guarantees other than this. Is that the case?
Well, there again, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'm sure you recognize the member has erred in two cases, one asking for my legal opinion about what is in the agreement. I'm hesitant to do that, Mr. Speaker. But again, Mr. Speaker, what you see here is the member from Norwood substituting his expert advice in real estate valuations for somebody else's. Very few people would agree with that, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate the second question, the member from Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week when we raised concerns about the fact that moments before Cabinet approved the loan guarantee and loan package to Mr. Peter Pocklington, they changed the rules that govern loan guarantees, making it possible for the government to issue these loan guarantees without knowing which loan is guaranteed or any of the details. As well, we learned that there was a $67 million debenture outstanding against a numbered company controlled by, in the main by Mr. John Carvalis, the SOFCO director. Trying to get answers out of the Minister of Economic Development, he advised us that once the order in council is passed, he's no longer interested and it's the responsibility of the provincial treasurer. And I'd like to ask the provincial treasurer, and deficit dick riding herd on Peter Puck is a frightening thought, Mr. Speaker. It's no wonder the Conservatives have driven this province $10 billion in debt. I'd like to ask the provincial treasurer, did the $55 million loan guarantee approved by Cabinet on March 3rd, 1988 go towards a $67 million debenture held by 369413 Alberta Limited?
Where's the floor?
Well, Mr. Speaker, here we have Foxy Loxy calling about the sky is falling. He wants to get in the name-calling business. Be glad to participate. Because you know what's happened, Mr. Speaker? It is unfortunate that through this process, this opposition party has used conspiracy tactics. They've misled the public. They've suggested that something is going to foul here, Mr. Speaker, but it's the common kind of fallacious arguments you see from the socialists across the way. As Bacon once said, post hoc ergo prompta fallacy, and you can check that. How is that, eh? After that, therefore, because of that, Mr. Speaker, the point is this, Mr. Speaker, just because we had to change the regulations 2 or 3 days, or for that matter 2 or 3 moments in advance of some other transaction, cannot be tied together. Now let me make it very clear, Mr. Speaker, that those transactions are not tied in any way. Those changed regulations are not tied in any way to the Pocklington arrangement. Now, the second area where Foxy Loxy made his mistake, of course, is to suggest that because we put together this holding company, that again something suspicious is taking place. That just isn't the case, Mr. Speaker. Just isn't the case. This is a traditional kind of process where, in fact, we put these kinds of agreements in place all the time to ensure that we can take comfort and legal claim against the assets held by this company and all other provinces, as opposed, Mr. Speaker, to having the Crown take claim. We had this numbered company put in place. And there's no suspicion. There's nothing sub rosa. There's nothing illegal about this process. It's a process which is done all the time. And what I object to is the way in which he's indicted this suspicion, Mr. Speaker, and in fact has drawn into, to some respect, disrepute some lawyers who serve the province. And that, Mr. Speaker, is reprehensible.
Trying to get the truth.
Mr. Speaker, the Treasurer said we put the holding company together. I'd like to ask the provincial treasurer if 369-413 Alberta Limited is merely a front for Treasury Branch money put together by this provincial treasurer to lend the money to Peter Pocklington that we in turn guaranteed.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd be glad to explain that. I mean, if this is what they want to find out, I'd be more than pleased to explain this to the gentleman. I know he's confused generally with respect to business dealings. I know the Socialist Party does not understand how the private sector operates. But what this corporation does, Mr. Speaker, is very simple. Very simple, as I tried to explain. This is the vehicle where we take our claim against the corporation, and it's also the company that has no other purpose but to register its claim, our security, in other provinces. It's a trustee corporation, Mr. Speaker. As opposed to the Crown, it's a trustee corporation. It's done all the time in terms of private sector activity where the Crown's involved. And that's what I'm making very clear, Mr. Speaker. There should be no suspicion, no suggestions at all of wrongdoing. And I think the opposition should clean up their act, Mr. Speaker.
Where's money?
This is the guy that drove us $10 billion in debt, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
I'd like the provincial treasurer to be very clear about this now. Whose loan did the people of Alberta co-sign through this government approving loan guarantee on March 3rd for Peter Pocklington? Whose loan did we co-sign?
Mr. Speaker, we didn't co-sign any loan, and therefore that just simply goes to the heart, Mr. Speaker. The member uses wrong words, leaves a wrong impression, because he doesn't understand the business sector, Mr. Speaker. We did not co-sign a loan.
Thank you. Member for Edmonton Glengarry, Leader of the Liberal Party. Edmonton Glengarry, not Edmonton Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, in the last year, the last few months, we've seen the Premier and his government give an incredible array of concessions to the pulp and paper industry in Alberta and getting an industry started. Recently, in fact, a study that was done recently in a report issued by the Canadian Pulp and Paper Association proves pretty conclusively that Albertans are not receiving full value for our forest resources. The association survey shows that stumpage fees charged in Alberta are amongst the lowest in the nation, with only Saskatchewan and Manitoba charging less for softwood pulp. Even when our extra levies are factored in, we are 4th out of 5 provinces that charge such extra levies. My question to the Minister of Forestry is this: can the Minister confirm that Alberta Pacific will sell its pulp production for upwards to $300 million per year, while Alberta will only receive $7.5 million per year for the same lumber that creates the pulp?
Mr. Speaker, I can't answer the question, and I don't know where the honourable member got his facts from, because we have not completed negotiations on a forest management agreement with Alberta Pacific. Part of the forest management agreement, of course, would encompass what the stumpage rates would be for that particular project. So since I haven't negotiated it yet and finalized, I can't comment on that.
Well, perhaps, Mr. Speaker, the Minister could look at his own letter of February the 1st, which was sent to Mr. Mitchell, where we got the figures from, sir. Second question, Mr. Speaker, does the Minister believe that it is prudent for Alberta to be giving away these resources at bargain basement prices at the same time that we are proposing to move into the forest industry in such a big fashion? Is it prudent, sir?
Mr. Speaker, we are in no way giving away our forest resource in the province of Alberta, and if you can take stumpage rates as one factor, that's included in the price of the wood. There are other factors that are taken into account if you're going to look at the overall charges that are charged any company. They include holding charges, protection charges, reforestation levies, road improvements, and then there's a softwood lumber tax that goes in over and above that. And Mr. Speaker, if you take all of those factors into consideration, you'll find out that Alberta's resource here is very competitive. And of course, that has been part of the reason we've been able to attract industries here and to generate over $2 billion in capital construction in mills using a resource that up until this point was considered a weed.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. By giving away these resources at these bargain basement prices, is the province not forgoing millions upon millions of dollars that could otherwise be used to pay down the deficit that you, sir, have created in this province?
Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate that the honourable member continues to take an extremely shallow look at some of these important issues. And as he raised his first question and received an answer from the honourable member, ignored the answer and continued to read whatever the researcher has prepared for him. We have to point out, Mr. Speaker, that one of the most important things for Alberta in developing our lumber resources, as the honourable minister said, that this be a competitive resource. After all, while there are $3.5 billion of investment flowing into this province in order to diversify and strengthen our economy and provide opportunities, jobs in areas that have not had stable long-term employment, let's remember that billions of dollars will in fact be payrolls for Albertans. That's an example of a government doing a job it promised the people it would do.
Right.
Banff Cochran, followed by Edmonton Jasper Place.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the code inquiry into the collapse of the principal group of companies has been ongoing for the past 2 years. Tomorrow is the 18th of July, and therefore my question is to the Honourable Provincial Treasurer. Can the people of the province of Alberta expect the code report to be presented to Justice Berger tomorrow?
Mr. Speaker, it's my understanding that Mr. Code has made arrangements to bring his report to Mr. Justice Berger tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, at which time I'm sure the Honourable Justice will consider what it is he's going to do with the report, and later on that day we'll receive word from Mr. Justice Berger as to how he'll dispatch the publication.
My supplementary, Mr. Speaker, again to the Honourable Provincial Treasurer, presuming that Justice Berger makes the report public, can the people of Alberta expect an immediate response from this government?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure as all Albertans are aware, this process has been ongoing now for 2 years and about a month. And during that period, this province, this government has made every opportunity available to those people involved, and certainly the contract holders, to find out what happened. As all members know, the process took over 600 days. There were 67,000 pages of testimony, and a lot of people were involved. And as well known, of course, the province ensured that the perfect information was provided wherever possible, including providing full cooperation. So I don't think anybody in Alberta, for that matter, anyone across Canada who was affected by the outcome of the code inquiry, would expect us to handle this in a 20-minute turnaround period. As I understand the report, it's about 800 pages long. And I think, Mr. Speaker, we will recommend to our colleagues in caucus that we take whatever time is necessary to fully understand the process. And therefore, I would expect it'll be at least a week before we come to some conclusion as to its outcome. And over that period, we'll certainly read carefully what is involved, have a process in place whereby our colleagues in government have a chance to look at their own departmental responsibilities under the code inquiry, and we'll come to a proper evaluation of our position sometime next week.
Pass. Edmonton Jasper Place, followed by Calgary Buffalo, and then Bow Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been a number of recent surveys with a common result. The one referred to earlier in question period is among them. The result is the same. Alberta stumpage rates are among the lowest in Canada, if not the lowest. Certainly the prices that are charged to the major forest companies under recently signed forest management agreements, I suggest a quota by any other name, are well below the world price of timber. Has the minister decided to discontinue the use of quota or forest management
agreements to set price, instead introduce some free enterprise and some competitive bidding for some of the timber.
Mr. Speaker, it's about a year ago that I had the entire quota policy reviewed with the industry, and with some minor changes which we made, they were very happy with the quota policy, so of course it will stay. The forest management agreements themselves are each year the pulp prices are changed, of course, and the stumpage rates for the wood that goes into pulp mills is indexed to the price of pulp. So, Mr. Speaker, there is a good amount of free enterprise and some flexibility to change and to improve, as pulp prices will undoubtedly increase in the future, that the stumpage rates, in fact, will increase.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in view of the fact that the public doesn't share the enthusiasm of the forest companies for these low prices, I wonder if the minister will advise whether it will be the policy of the government to increase stumpage in the new forest management agreements now under negotiation, or whether they're going to remain at the same low levels.
They will be in the competitive range. Of course, I've been looking at areas where it could be enhanced. Our reforestation and management practices are recognized around the world as among the best, if not the best. And I'd like to see that enhanced even further. And to work on those standards, that would put some additional cost on the companies. And of course, I'll look at all of those areas to make sure not only that our wood supplies remain consistent price-wise, but the quality improves and is enhanced not only for this generation, but many generations thereafter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, in view of the fact that these forest management agreements are critically important to the future of the northern forest resource, not just the people who live in that area, but throughout the province, I wonder if the government's decided to change the current practice of withholding forest management agreements until after the pulp mills are built, till after the environmental review process is through, in other words, till the game is over. You decided to make that information available before the reviews are completed.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the forest management agreements are normally signed far before the mill the construction is completed, because that's part of the package that a mill has to have the wood supply, or who would arrange financing for a particular mill. So that, of course, is done. You should know that the forest management agreement is an umbrella agreement and is a 20-year agreement. Each year, there's certain aspects that must be negotiated that take place each year, and part of the negotiation, of course, is the difference in stumpage rates that are reflected in the pulp prices. At the end of 20 years, then, of course, there's a renegotiation of that agreement, so it isn't forever in any stretch, and each one of those companies has obligations and responsibilities in that forest management agreement to live up to them. Included in those forest management agreement areas are also quota holders and timber permits, and there's other people also operating in those areas, and that's also taken into consideration in any forest management agreement negotiation.
Calgary, Buffalo, Bow Valley, Edmonton, Avonmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's more and more evidence that the numbered company that was referred to in the earlier question is part of the scheme of the government to have their involvement in hiding the involvement of the government in financing the Pocklington group of companies from the people of Alberta. There's every indication that that $67 million loan flowed through 369413 Alberta Ltd. On or about September 25th, 87 was a loan from the provincial treasury branch or other government entity. And the use of the numbered companies serves no purpose other than to hide the true facts. I wonder whether the provincial treasurer will tell this House simply and clearly, without the baffle-gab of his earlier answer, whether or not the Treasury branch or some other provincial entity provided the $67 million that was loaned by 369413 to Alberta Limit by Alberta, that company, to Gainers Properties, Inc., and if so, how much it provided.
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, there are two parts to this process. The first part is the $55 million amount, and the second part is a $12 million amount. I think even the member from Buffalo understands the $12 million amount, so that's how you come to the $67 million amount. As my colleague has pointed out, $6 million of the $12 million have been advanced, but specifically, Mr. Speaker, the answer is no.
the minister said he did not provide any of the $67 million, and earlier he said that the $55 million guarantee approved March 3rd did not relate to the $67 million. And if it didn't relate to the $67 million, then perhaps the minister could tell this House clearly and straightforwardly, since he is responsible in law for administering that guarantee, what did that guarantee secure, that $55 million guarantee from March 3rd, and what is the magnitude of the current amount of the risk to the people of Alberta in respect to the guarantee?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, there are about 4 or 5 questions there, and I'll do my best to provide the information possible, but if you want a factual explanation of what's happened, I'll be glad to give it, but every time you get a question which is preempted by the specious arguments and specious reasoning that is involved here, it's very difficult to give a reasoned approach and give the facts to the question. And so I would try to provide, wherever possible, the answer. And the quick fact is, as I've indicated already, that we know that $6 million has been advanced in the General Revenue Fund. That's a term credit loan secured against all the assets we talked about earlier this afternoon. And of that $12 million potential, only $6 million has been advanced. And the first interest payment will take place in October of 1989. Now, my colleague, the Minister of Economic Development, has explained all that to you, Mr. Speaker. So put that aside. The second part of the question is, what is the $55 million? Well, already today we talked about the security which we have taken. I think I've clarified that we've got a good charge against the fixed assets of all the corporations. Now, again, because of this conspiracy argument, even today the Socialist Party is suggesting because we split the 2 companies, we can't secure our claim against those companies. Well, that's just, again, nonsense. Almost as bad as the member from Buffalo's nonsense we're getting right now, who also talked about some disagreement among cabinet members with respect to how we handle ourselves in this particular case. Nothing could be further from the truth, Mr. Speaker. Now, what we do have here is a guarantee to another company, another corporation, another bank who provides money. And our guarantee is backstopped by these covenants, as we talked about, including the fixed assets. And as far as we know, there's nothing that we can say with respect to the valuations. We took appraisals at the time the guarantee was given. We now have security. The Minister of Economic Development said that if the plant in Southern Alberta is not started, we will not advance any more money. Every time we go to advance money, we get a signed affidavit from the company saying they're not in default, have not bridged the master agreement. All that has taken place, Mr. Speaker. And so what we've seen here is like Foxy Loxy again, running to tell the king that the sky is falling. Well, the member from Buffalo is doing the same thing.
Oh, the minister, Mr. Speaker, is doing his usual job of evading the question. He's evading the issue.
Supplementary.
I'm wondering whether he would clarify in respect of his first answer, whether, in respect to that $67 million loan of September the 25th, 1987, loaned by 369413 Alberta Limited to Gaynors Properties Limited, the Carvelis Company, is he saying that no part of that money was provided by the provincial treasury branch?
Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying is that there was no loan made by that corporation, as I tried to explain again. Now, I know the member has a legal mind, but he doesn't understand the legal process. In any event, this is a very simple process whereby our security is put into the numbered company. The numbered company is the company which advances the debentures against the 2 operating companies, Gaynors Property Incorporated, Gaynors Incorporated. And its major responsibility is to ensure the debentures in place and to secure the asset. It's a trustee for the province of Alberta, Mr. Speaker. That's its role. It does nothing else, and that's essentially what it does.
Member for Bow Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Honourable Minister of Environment. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Environment has encouraged certain organizations to collect paper for recycling and have, in fact, in most cases, supplied a trailer for storing and transportation of papers. Quite a few of those are in my constituency. The value of paper for recycling varies from $5 per ton to $60 per ton, depending on the ability to process the paper at the rate it is being collected. While world prices for paper is at a record high level, it is my understanding, Mr. Speaker, that the de-inking process is done in northwestern United States, and that's a major problem in recycling the amount of paper that's collected. would the minister consider promoting or encouraging the establishment of a plant in Alberta to de-ink paper for recycling?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is quite correct in that de-inking is a key component to any recycling operation. And right now, my department, along with the Department of Economic Development and Forestry Lands and Wildlife, are looking at two de-inking proposals, one right here in the city of Edmonton, and one in relationship to the Alberta Newsprint Company's CTMP pulp mill project in Whitecourt. And we simply hope to work with the proponents of these facilities and help to bring them along and provide whatever expertise is necessary to put these plants in place.
Supplementary, if these plants fail, by the way, would the minister then consider establishing a provincially owned plant for de-inking newspapers?
Well, I would you're absolutely right, and that's what I would like not to be. And so it's for that reason, Mr. Speaker, the reason just cited by the opposition, that we will try to encourage the private sector to establish the de-inking facilities as it should be. But I'll make this undertaking in that we will provide the resources and the expertise of the department to make sure it comes about in an economically viable fashion.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. In quite a few cases, organizations have a backlog of newspapers that they have collected that are not able to dispose of. Would the minister consider putting a base price or a minimum price on newspapers so that these people could be guaranteed something for collecting them?
Mr. Speaker, recycled paper, like any other commodity, is market-driven. And I don't think that we want to get into the business of establishing prices. I think that we would want to let the market prevail. And I think that where the department can play a role is to provide assistance in establishing long-term and stable markets.
To Edmonton Avonmore, followed by Edmonton Gold Bar, Redwater Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are to the Attorney General. Research done in the late 70s prior to the maintenance enforcement program indicated that approximately 1/3 of the debtors paid maintenance regularly and were paid up to date. 50 to 60% paid sporadically and were in arrears. And in excess of 10% of cases, there was no reported payment at all. The report tabled in the House on Friday as to the success rate of the maintenance enforcement program shows remarkably similar statistics as of June 1989. My question to the minister, has the minister evaluated this much-needed program to see why it has failed so miserably?
Mr. Speaker, as with the other questions that have come from that side of the House today, we're fraught with erroneous ideas that something is not right. This is a great program, and I think the majority of the people that have filed willingly, voluntarily, or through the recent amendment, all maintenance enforcement agreements are originally filed. There's been a significant recapture of money for the individual members that are involved in a marital dispute, as well as recouping a great deal of money for the province, where money has been used to stabilize these people's lives while one of the former members to a marriage wasn't able to pay. But the number that the member is using and bandying about is erroneous. The statistics that were tabled in answer to a question of last year indicated that there was approximately 32% that had full and complete payment. And there's actually more people that get full and complete payment on that, because there's a number of people that don't register because they are getting full payment, and there's a number of people who withdraw because they're getting full payment. So statistics can be made, as the honourable member is doing, to make whatever case they want, but that is erroneous.
Mr. Speaker, 66% of the creditors registered to this program are dissatisfied, and I've heard from a great number of them. Given that much of the problem with this program is the discretionary power of the director to enforce collection of child support orders, including arrears, in excess of 3 years, will the minister amend the Act to require collection of all child support orders and arrears?
Mr. Speaker, the arrears are pursued and pursued vigorously where there's an indication that the person has any ability to pay. There are a number of cases, obviously, where a person doesn't have any means, and in those instances, unfortunately, there's very little that can be done. The member, I think, understands the program and should well understand the program. It is there to collect a maintenance order of the court. If the maintenance order is not satisfactory to either member of that dispute, they have to go back to the court to get that amended, and it is not part of the duty of the people in the program or the minister in charge to do that. They have to do that of their own volition.
Mr. Speaker, my concern, as is the Advisory Council on Women's Issues, is the discretionary power of the director. The Advisory Council has made 7 recommendations, and I would ask the minister what action he is going to take immediately to implement the recommendations made by the Advisory Council on Women's Issues.
Mr. Speaker, the recommendations that have been brought forward are being perused. In fact, some of them have been implemented. We've increased the manpower under the program that enhanced collection ability, or the time spent, because the file load was decreased. But again, the member fails to realize that in many instances you cannot obtain blood or water from a stone. If there are no resources, you could spend hours and hours, days and days, weeks on weeks trying to extract some money, and it'd be far better, and is far better, to utilize those resources in files where there is some help, some hope of getting some of the money, and that's in fact what is happening.
Edmonton Goldbyer, followed by Redwater Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions too are to the Attorney General on the same program, but take a different approach, sir. Mr. Speaker, for the past 3.5 years, and again today, the government has insisted that its maintenance enforcement program is successfully achieving its objectives. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, the government's not listening to the thousands of Alberta women who have their own personal horror story in their dealings. In spite of the Attorney General's confidence in the program expressed here, Mr. Speaker, this is not borne out in the numbers that we see. In fact, based on the report from the Institute of Law Research and Reform, 38% of maintenance cases were paid in full in 1980. We have now decreased that number by 5.5% that are being successfully collected. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Attorney General is, has the minister himself bothered to review and test registrants to determine what their ideas are for change and their comments about how the program could be improved? These are the people who really know what needs to be done.
Parties let the papers do the research for them.
Mr. Speaker, one of the problems when a member reads the question is that they pay no attention to what has been stated just previously. And the member for Edmonton Avonmore, I explained, I thought quite clearly, that the statistic showed 32.5, but that was of orders that were right there. There was a number of orders that are withdrawn because they're getting complete payment. There's a number that are didn't register because they're getting complete payment. The statistic is not accurate in that respect.
But the question wasn't answered with respect. Mr. Speaker, we're all aware that there's been a modest increase in funding. Will the minister now undertake to report back to the legislature within 6 months to keep the House informed about what the track record is of this program, which is obviously failing.
Mr. Speaker, this very excellent and very successful program, the information is available for the honourable member at any time. She just has to contact my office. I'm in contact by phone and by letter with numerous participants or claimants under this program, and I have many of them that show that it's a very, very successful program.
Mr. Speaker, will the minister then amend the legislation to require ex-spouses to submit only certified checks to lessen the hardship when mothers are forced to wait for checks to clear?
Mr. Speaker, there are many payments that aren't made by directly from the spouse or ex-spouse. They come in various forms, whether it happens to be UIC or income tax or payments. In many occasions, if there's found to be an ex-spouse that regularly gives checks that are not valid, steps like that are taken.
Redwater Andrew, followed by Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. I understand, Mr. Speaker, that a very important delegation from the Ukraine has arrived in Alberta. Could the Minister explain the purpose of their visit?
Mr. Speaker, it was with delight that I had the opportunity this morning to participate in the opening of the Ukraine Trade Show, which is taking place here in the city of Edmonton in conjunction with Her Honor the Lieutenant Governor and the Premier of our province, whereby we have the opportunity to salute the outstanding contribution that the Ukrainian community have made to the province of Alberta. And the Premier took the occasion at the trade show to pay tribute to their outstanding contribution, plus to indicate the close ties that do exist between the Ukraine and the province of Alberta. Northlands and Dr. Horst Schmidt have been very instrumental in putting together this trade show, which has a cultural and economic component.
Mr. Speaker, I think this could be funny maybe to the opposition, but to my constituents it isn't.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, could the minister clarify whether this is strictly a trade mission, or is there a cultural component to this as well?
Mr. Speaker, it's natural that we highlight the trade component in view of the fact that the Soviet bloc itself is our 5th or 6th largest trading partner with the province of Alberta. The emphasis is on trade, but as I indicated too, there is a cultural component plus the opportunity to stress the close relationship that does exist. And I'm sure that the Minister of Culture and Multiculturalism would like to supplement the cultural component.
Indeed, I would appreciate the opportunity to add my comments to those of my colleagues with regard to the cultural component here. I think most members of the Assembly will be aware that the Ukrainian Shumka dancers are an internationally known component of Edmonton, Alberta culture, but are based on Ukrainian culture. And it's this sort of exchange involving trade and culture and education that gives us a great deal of pride. Albertans, of course, owe a debt of gratitude to the Ukrainian people who played an important role in the settling of this end of the country and continue to play an important role in our economy and an ongoing contribution. So this type of an event that we encourage, last year there was one involving Australia, this year the Ukraine, and on into the future there will be similar trade and cultural exchanges. It's an opportunity to learn more about other lands, other peoples, other cultures, and to broaden ourselves, so we certainly fully endorse it.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, and I think the members of Whitemud would also like to, constituents of Whitemud would also like to know some of this. Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, what type of follow-up will the Minister be doing on behalf of the Alberta government?
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member is aware and has an appreciation for, trade is a very important component of our way of life within the province, and that we do rely so heavily on the exports of the goods that we do produce within this province. In 1987, to the Soviet bloc, we exported in excess of $200 million. We want to continue with that strong trade component, recognizing that it does create jobs. Our ministry will be following up with those individuals in the exhibits that are shown here so that we can continue that two-way trade, which is essential to both our province and to our country.
Edmonton Strathcona.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Attorney General. Sorry it's pick on Attorney General Day today. This year is a year in which Queen's Counsel are appointed at the end of the year for the new year next year. And I'd like the Attorney General to tell us if there is any principle that he can discern in the selection of these people.
Mr. Speaker, the QC designation comes from a tradition that relates back in our British history for in excess of over 300 years, and it is now more of an honorary or traditional, and I have been working closely with the Law Society and the benchers to ensure that they have a great deal of input into the selections that are coming up, if we have any this year, and look forward to that date.
I wonder if the Attorney General can tell us what it is about membership of the Conservative Party of the province that so specially qualifies lawyers for this honor.
The good ones are conservative.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not so sure that all of the people that have been honored with the designation belong to this party. I've never asked in any time that I've had as to membership of what they are.
Yeah, there are some Socrates.
I wonder if the Attorney General would consider recommending to the legislature a change of the designation to something rather more current and self-explanatory, such as successful older barrister.
You can have one. You can have one.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Oh. Mr. That's a hard act. That's a hard act to follow. I notice they've just spelled out the initials, Mr. Speaker. This is to the Premier, Mr. Speaker. In view of the questions of the $300,000 to $400,000 of beef a day or cattle are slaughtered each day to the Gainers plant, there's of course a great deal of a concern, Mr. Speaker, because half of this is on the credit, you might say, it's rail grade, 3 to 4 days down the road before they get paid. So their farmers are at a considerable, or they may be at considerable risk in the fact that if something happens to the packing plant and to the guarantees that don't work out, the farmers could get stuck with the cost of the beef. Could the Premier assure this House, in view of the fact that this government has a well-known reputation, Mr. Speaker, stomping in with their number 12 shoes as they did them in the principal case and hurting a lot of innocent people, that if something goes wrong here, that no farmer will suffer because of beef being delivered.
Thank you, honourable member. What's the question without bringing in more than one issue here? Let's go.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member in his circuitous way finally arrived at what is a totally hypothetical question. It is a matter, though, that he has engaged the Minister of Agriculture in discussion over the period of this session, so I'd be pleased to make sure that the Minister of Agriculture is aware of his question and may wish to respond to him either personally or through the legislature.
Time for question period has expired. May we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Agriculture is in charge of marketing, but guarantees of the Treasurer is between the Premier and the Treasurer. Could the Treasurer tell whether he has any process in view and any process in the works that will guarantee beef producers payment for their beef if something happens to the packing company?
Again, Mr. Speaker, we have the case of the honourable member drawing a hypothetical question. Still, Mr. Speaker, I gather he wants to pursue this with the Minister of Agriculture with regards to income to farm population, and I'll draw it to the Minister's attention.
Mr. Speaker, the happening is hypothetical, but the fact of whether you have insurance or not is a fact. What I'd like then, Premier, then, could he give the House the insurance that he will pressure the Minister of Agriculture to contact the Cattle Commission to put an insurance scheme in that will protect beef producers against untoward happening from any packing company going under?
Mr. Speaker, I certainly will ask the Honourable Minister of Agriculture to consider the member's request and to see if there is any area in which the Minister of Agriculture feels we should proceed.
Point of order, Edmonton Whitemud.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again I refer to Motion 4081, which very clearly directs that question period is to be used for a specific purpose, and that is to be used to deal with questions which are asked only in respect of matters of sufficient urgency and importance as to require an immediate answer. And Mr. Speaker, I point out in the parliamentary process and parliamentary tradition, the 45 minutes that is allocated for this particular period of time is extremely essential, and it should not be abused, and is there for a reason. And I refer specifically to the question asked by the member of the Honourable Member from Redwater, Andrew. Now, I relate that to the question Friday about the flip-flopping pancakes. And at that particular time, in Hansard, page 763, Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Speaker replies, well, Honourable Members, I feel that the Honourable Member for Edmonton Whitemud has a point, and I am sorry for not interrupting earlier. And he goes on to state, but I do accept the Honourable Member's comments about the sense of urgency and the importance of question period. So, Mr. Speaker, what I would ask of you, request of you, can you give a written set of guidelines, can you give a statement so that the members on that side of the House and at that end closest to you are aware of what type of questions, and not puffball questions, but questions of urgency that require an immediate answer are asked in this House?
Member for Red Deer North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the point of order, in citing Beauchesne 409-4, it's very clearly written, we have a very clear written set of guidelines on question period, and 409-4 says it ought to be an important matter. The question that we're looking at here had to do with the Ukraine exhibit and the other things that have come to this province. Mr. Speaker, this is historic in this century in the Western world to see such a release of exhibits and different materials from behind the Iron Curtain. And because the member opposite probably doesn't have any Ukraine ancestry, he considers this not to be important. This is a significant, historic event, and all members of our party are very proud of this event. It is important and it is urgent, and it meets the guidelines laid out in 409-4.
Well, first off, the chair did indeed review the Hansard of Friday and noticed the exchange that did take place between the chair and the member for Edmonton Whitemud. The ruling was made on that occasion with respect to that particular issue, and therefore that is past history in terms of this legislature. The point of order, the purported point of order as raised today fails in the estimation of the chair, because if the honourable member, along with other members of the House, will read the Hansard as of today's exchange, you'll find that there was quite considerable detail given in terms of the responses by the Minister of Economic Development and Trade in particular, with respect to some statistics regarding trade, and then also the matter of the cultural component as well. Therefore, the chair does not regard this as a point of order, but just a complaint on behalf of a member. One also would point out the concern and frustration that members do have on all sides of the House and some members within each political party as to whether or not the questions as being raised are of sufficient import or not. The chair was also interested to note that the member for Edmonton Whitemud did not call point of order with respect to the last supplementary question as raised by the member for Edmonton Strathcona, which indeed was also lacking in terms of that particular reference in Beauchesne.